There was a man who lived in a quiet neighborhood, someone who minded his own business and never tried to get into arguments with anyone. He liked keeping to himself most of the time, but one thing everyone knew about him was that he loved cooking. It wasn't that he was a professional chef or that he cooked fancy meals every day. No, his love for cooking was simple and fun. He enjoyed trying out new recipes, mixing spices, and surprising his close friends with different dishes. On weekends, he often spent hours in the kitchen experimenting, sometimes laughing at his own failures, and sometimes smiling proudly when things turned out delicious. The neighbors had often seen him carrying bags of groceries, sometimes bags, full of chicken, peppers, and all sorts of vegetables. They never thought much of it, because everyone in the neighborhood had their own hobbies. Some people loved gardening, some were into fixing cars, some spent all day decorating their lawns, and for him, it was cooking. Never showed off, and he never asked anyone to come over unless it was a close friend. In every neighborhood, there is always one person who just can't mind their own business, and in this neighborhood, that person was a woman everyone secretly called Karen. Karen was the kind of neighbor who always found something to complain about. If someone parked too close to her driveway, she would storm outside, waving her hands and yelling until the person moved their car. If kids played outside too loudly, she would lecture their parents about disturbing the peace. If anyone had something good, she would find a way to talk about it, twist it, and spread it around as if it was her business. People tolerated her because it was easier than arguing, but no one actually liked her. One Friday afternoon, the man was unloading groceries from his car, bags full of chicken, peppers, onions, and sauces. He had an idea in his head to try out different recipes the next day. He wasn't planning anything big, just a little personal cooking project for fun. Karen happened to be outside trimming her bushes, and of course, she noticed the grocery bags. She always noticed everything. She couldn't resist making a comment. "Wow, that's a lot of food. Are you planning a party or something?" The man laughed lightly, trying to brush it off. He didn't want a long conversation with her, because every time she started talking, she ended up dragging things on and twisting words. He said casually, "Nah, nothing big. Just making some extra food this weekend. I like to experiment. Maybe I'll have leftovers for days." He chuckled at his own words and carried the bags inside now. To a normal person, this was just a harmless comment. But to Karen, it was like receiving golden gossip. In her mind, extra food and leftovers somehow translated to free buffet. And because Karen loved feeling important in the neighborhood, she decided to take this tiny piece of information and blow it up into something much bigger. That evening, as she walked around the block, she began telling people with a proud voice, "Oh, did you hear? He's hosting a free neighborhood buffet tomorrow. Said he's making so much food, everyone should come by." Some neighbors were surprised, some were curious, and some didn't even question it because Karen said it with such confidence. She even added little details that made it sound real. Said he's cooking all day and doesn't want the food to go to waste. Invited everyone. Isn't that so generous of him? Of course, the man hadn't invited anyone. He was completely unaware that Karen was spinning her story, while he was busy marinating chicken and chopping vegetables in his kitchen. People in the neighborhood were already planning to show up at his place the next day with plates ready. The next morning, the man was happily preparing his meals. He had music playing in the background, pots bubbling on the stove, and the smell of spices filling the air. He thought it was going to be a peaceful day of cooking, eating, and maybe watching TV later. But before long, he heard a knock on the door. When he opened it, he saw two neighbors standing there with smiles on their faces. "Hey, we heard about the buffet," one of them said. "Smells great already." The man blinked in confusion. "Buffet? What buffet?" "You know the one you're hosting today," the neighbor replied cheerfully. "Karen told us. She said you invited the whole neighborhood." At first, he thought it was some kind of joke. He laughed awkwardly and said, "Oh no, I didn't invite anyone. I'm just cooking for myself." But then, before he could explain further, another group of neighbors walked up behind them. And then another. Suddenly, his front yard was filling with people, all chatting happily and expecting free food. Karen, of course, was at the front of it all, acting like she was the one who helped organize it. She smiled wide and said loudly, "Don't be shy, everyone. Said he has more than enough food. Come on in. She pushed the door open slightly, as if she owned the place. The man stood there, stunned, realizing what had happened. Karen had twisted his words into an open invitation. And now, half the neighborhood was outside his door expecting a feast. For a split second, he thought about shouting at them, kicking everyone out, and confronting Karen right there. But then another thought popped into his head. He had his cameras at home. He had plenty of ingredients. Most importantly, he had an idea. Instead of pushing back, he smiled slowly and said, "Oh, sure, come on in." His voice was calm, almost a calm, which made Karen smirk proudly, thinking she had gotten away with everything. She had no idea that in that very moment, the man was already planning his revenge as people poured into the house. Admiring the food smells and chatting about how kind he was, the man quietly set up a few cameras in the corners of the kitchen and living room. He told everyone he wanted to capture the fun of the buffet, and they all believed him. Reality. He was setting the stage for one of the funniest afternoons the neighborhood would ever experience. What had started as a simple cooking day had turned into a full-blown event thanks to Karen's big mouth. But the man wasn't going to let it end with him being used. If Karen wanted to tell everyone he was hosting a free buffet, then a buffet they would get, but not the kind they expected. And so while the crowd began to settle in, waiting for plates of food, he began preparing a special dish that would change the mood completely. His plan was forming clearly in his head, and all he had to do was stay calm and let things unfold. The man stood in his kitchen watching the crowd settle in, still trying to wrap his head around the fact that so many people had walked into his house without even being invited. His small living room was filled with voices, laughter, and the scraping of chairs as people made themselves comfortable. Some of them carried empty plates from their homes, ready to load them up. A couple of teenagers had even brought soda bottles, as if they were attending a real community party. Karen was walking around with her usual air of self-importance, talking loudly so everyone could hear her. "Didn't I tell you all? Always cooking too much food," I told him. "Instead of wasting it, he should share it with the neighborhood. Look at this turnout. Isn't this wonderful?" The man quietly shook his head and forced a polite smile. He knew very well he hadn't invited anyone, and Karen was lying through her teeth. But the funny thing was that most people believed her. Nobody stopped to ask him directly. They just assumed she was telling the truth because she acted so confident. Instead of getting angry, he let them talk. He had already decided in his mind that he would not waste this opportunity. He wanted to teach Karen a lesson she would never forget, and he wanted to do it in such a way that everyone would see the truth with their own eyes, so he continued cooking. But this time, he cooked with two separate plans in mind. On one side of the kitchen, he kept preparing regular food: fried chicken, rice, some pasta, and vegetables, enough to make sure people had something normal to eat. But on the other side, he started preparing a tray that was going to be very, very different. He pulled out a bag of ghost peppers he had bought earlier that week. They were bright red, shiny, and fiery just to look at. Ghost peppers weren't just hot. They were some of the spiciest peppers in the world. It's just touching them could make your fingers burn. Cooking with them filled the air with a sharp, stinging smell that could make people cough. The man had tried them before in small amounts, and he knew exactly how powerful they were. Most people couldn't handle even one bite. He smiled to himself as he began chopping them carefully, using gloves and keeping a fan running so the smell wouldn't sting his eyes. He diced them finely and mixed them into a thick, sticky sauce. Then he tossed a batch of chicken wings into the sauce until they were completely coated, glistening with that fiery red color. He placed them neatly on a tray, making them look mouth-watering but deadly. To make it even more convincing, he put a small handwritten label next to the tray: "Extra flavorful wings." While he was doing this, Karen barged into the kitchen as if she owned the place. She peeked over his shoulder and said in her usual nosy tone, "Wow, you've made so much. Good thing I told everyone to come. You'll be the hero of the block." After this, the man turned slightly and gave her a smile that was calm but had a hidden sharpness to it. "Yes, thanks to you, I guess," he said. "It's turning into quite a gathering." Karen nodded proudly, not realizing there was something mischievous in his voice. She strutted back into the living room and announced, "Food will be ready soon, everyone. He's got all kinds of dishes lined up." By the time he carried the trays out, the living room turned into a scene of excitement. People clapped, cheered, and lined up as if it was a real buffet. Karen grabbed a plate and moved straight to the front of the line without hesitation, ignoring the people waiting behind her. She pointed at the tray of ghost pepper wings and said loudly, "Now these look amazing. Everyone has to try them." I always knew he was a good cook. The man set the tray down on the table and said with a straight face, "Those are extra flavorful. Just like the sign says. They're very strong." But Karen didn't listen. She grabbed 4 wings, stacked them on her plate, and strutted off to the couch like a queen. A few others followed her example, piling their plates with the bright red wings. Some people stuck to the pasta or fried chicken. But there were enough brave or greedy souls who wanted to taste the special wings. The man sat back and waited. He didn't have to say anything. The food would speak for itself at first. Everything seemed normal. People took bites, nodding at the taste. Karen chewed proudly, as if showing off. But then it began. One man coughed suddenly, grabbing his throat. Another woman's eyes widened as if she had just bitten into fire. The teenagers who had loaded their plates started fanning their mouths, gasping, "It's so hot. What is this?" Karen was the funniest of them all. She had stuffed 2 wings into her mouth without hesitation, and now her face turned bright red. Her eyes started watering, and she let out a loud choking sound. She grabbed her soda can, opened it, and tried to gulp it down. But the carbonation only made the burning worse. She began waving her hands wildly, gasping for air while tears rolled down her face. The living room erupted into chaos. People were running to the kitchen sink, pouring themselves water, grabbing tissues, and even opening the fridge looking for milk. Some were laughing at their own reactions, while others were genuinely panicking. The man kept a straight face, but inside he was laughing so hard he could barely stand still. And the best part? His cameras were capturing every single reaction. Karen, still fanning her mouth and sweating like she had just run a marathon, tried to save face. Between coughs, she croaked, These wings are just too flavorful." I told everyone they were special. But her act didn't work. Everyone could see she was in pain. Her nose was running, her makeup was smudged. She was hiccuping uncontrollably. The neighbors who hadn't eaten the wings began laughing at those who had. "You all look like you're in a chili eating contest," one of them shouted. The ones who were suffering weren't laughing at all. One man fanned his tongue with a paper plate. Another stuck his head in front of a fan. And a teenager actually lay down on the floor groaning dramatically. The man finally stepped in and handed a jug of milk around. He spoke in a calm, almost innocent tone. Did put up a sign saying they were extra flavorful. I wasn't lying. Ghost peppers are no joke. The room went quiet for a second as the realization sank in. Ghost peppers. The people who had eaten the wings groaned louder, and those who hadn't immediately pushed their plates away, relieved they hadn't touched them. Karen was furious, though she was still in too much pain to shout properly. Voice cracked as she yelled, "Why? Would you make something like that?" He looked at her with a calm smile and said, "Because I like to experiment, remember? You told everyone I was having a buffet, so I figured I'd give the neighborhood something unforgettable." The room burst into laughter again, this time directed at Karen. People were starting to realize that she had been the one spreading the false news. And while everyone else could laugh off the prank, Karen was stuck in the middle of it, red-faced, sweaty, and humiliated. The man, however, wasn't finished yet. He checked his cameras discreetly, making sure they were still recording. The footage was gold. He knew the real fun would come later, once people saw themselves on video. But for now, he let them continue the chaos. Sitting back and enjoying the show, what had started as a fake buffet was turning into a scene no one would ever forget, and for Karen, it was only the beginning of her embarrassment. The living room looked like a battlefield after a few minutes of people eating those ghost pepper wings. Some neighbors were clutching their stomachs. Some had their tongues hanging out as they gasped for air, and others were frantically waving paper towels like fans. The smell of food that had once filled the room was now mixed with the sound of coughing, sneezing, and groaning. Even though there was still pasta and fried chicken sitting untouched on the table, almost everyone's attention was on the bright red wings that had caused so much chaos. Karen, who had tried to act like the hostess of the evening, was in the worst shape of all. She sat on the couch, her hair sticking to her forehead from sweat, her face red as a tomato, and her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. She was gulping down milk straight from the jug, ignoring the fact that other people were waiting for it. Every time she tried to talk, hiccups cut her off, making her look even more ridiculous. One neighbor leaned against the wall, laughing so hard he almost dropped his plate. "This is the funniest buffet I've ever been to," he said between chuckles. Another neighbor, still fanning her mouth, shot Karen a sharp look and muttered, "You said this was all free food. You didn't say anything about poison wings?" Karen tried to defend herself, but the words came out in a broken, shaky voice. He said he was making extra." Her explanation didn't work. The neighbors were too busy pointing fingers at each other, laughing at their own reactions, or staring at Karen like she had tricked them on purpose. Meanwhile, the man who had started all of this was walking around calmly, refilling water glasses and offering tissues, acting like a perfect host. Inside, though, he was enjoying every second of the chaos. His cameras were still recording, catching the funniest moments: the dramatic teenager rolling on the floor yelling, "I'm dying." The middle-aged man who ran out to the porch to gulp fresh air. It was the group of women, laughing so hard their stomachs hurt. And of course, Karen, who looked like she had fought a fire-breathing dragon and lost. At one point, a brave neighbor decided to challenge himself. "Come on," he said proudly, "how bad can they be? You're all just overreacting." Grabbed a wing from the tray, took one huge bite, and within seconds, his face contorted into pure agony. He dropped the wing back on the plate and ran to the sink, sticking his whole mouth under the faucet. The room erupted in laughter again, and even the people still suffering couldn't help but chuckle. Karen, embarrassed that people were laughing at her instead of praising her, tried to stand up and regain control of the room. She wiped her face with a napkin, straightened her shirt, and clapped her hands together to get attention. Okay, everyone," she croaked, her voice hoarse. "From the burning, let's not blame anyone. The important thing is that he was kind enough to cook for us, right?" But instead of agreeing, someone in the back said loudly, "You mean you told everyone he was hosting a buffet? He never said that?" The room went quiet for a moment, and all eyes turned to Karen. She froze, her fake smile stiff on her face. She tried to laugh it off. "Well, I might have misunderstood. But I just thought it would be fun if everyone came together." The man leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and spoke up for the first time in a while. His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the amusement in it. "Yes, you definitely misunderstood. I never invited anyone. I was just cooking for myself. But since everyone showed up, I figured, why not share? After all, it's not every day the whole neighborhood shows up at my door uninvited." A wave of murmurs spread through the room. Some people looked embarrassed, realizing they had just walked into his home without questioning it. Others turned their heads toward Karen with annoyed expressions. The tension was thick, but the man's calm tone kept it from turning into an outright fight. Then came another wave of coughing and gasping as more people tried the wings despite the warnings. It was as if curiosity was stronger than common sense. "Maybe they're not that bad if you just eat one," someone said before, immediately regretting it. The crowd couldn't stop laughing now, even the ones who were still wiping tears from their eyes. Karen tried to regain her role again, standing up and declaring, "Well, at least this brought us all together. You should be thanking me for spreading the word. Otherwise, none of us would be here enjoying this. His feast." But her voice cracked on the last word, and she had to sit back down quickly as another hiccup attack hit her. The man walked past her with a small smirk on his face. "Yes, thank you, Karen. This is one buffet nobody will forget." His words made several neighbors chuckle under their breath. As the evening went on, people began to settle down from the spice attack. The ones who hadn't dared to try the wings enjoyed the pasta and fried chicken. The ones who had suffered through the ghost peppers were drinking glass after glass of milk, trying to cool their mouths. and slowly the laughter replaced the groaning. Everyone started telling stories of who had the funniest reaction, exaggerating and reenacting the moments. One neighbor stood up dramatically and pretended to collapse on the floor, copying the teenager who had done it earlier. The room roared with laughter again. Someone else imitated Karen's hiccups, which made people laugh so hard they almost cried. Karen didn't appreciate it, of course. She sat stiffly, arms crossed, still trying to maintain some dignity. But the man knew the truth. Her dignity was long gone. The cameras had caught everything. Every red face, every panicked run to the sink, every laugh, and every one of Karen's dramatic hiccups. He was already imagining what the footage would look like once he edited it together. It was going to be pure comedy gold. As the night went on, people began to leave, thanking him as they walked out the door. Some were embarrassed, some were still laughing, and some promised to bring him milk as a gift next time. A few neighbors apologized quietly for barging in uninvited, admitting that they had just believed Karen without thinking. By the time the house was empty again, the man finally sat down, exhausted but satisfied. The trays of food were nearly empty. The ghost pepper wings had caused enough chaos to last a lifetime, and Karen's reputation had taken a huge hit. He looked around his messy living room and smiled. The cameras had captured every second, and he couldn't wait to watch the footage. He leaned back in his chair and chuckled softly to himself. What had started as an ordinary day of cooking had turned into a legendary story for the whole neighborhood. The best part was that it wasn't over yet. The footage was going to take the chaos to a whole new level. The next morning, the man woke up with a smile still on his face. His house smelled faintly of spices from the night before, and his kitchen looked like it had survived a storm. Plates were stacked in the sink, empty milk cartons were scattered around, and there were napkins crumpled on the counters. But none of that bothered him. He sat down with a cup of coffee and opened his laptop, eager to see the footage from the cameras he had set up. As the videos loaded, he leaned back in his chair and started laughing almost immediately. The first clip showed neighbors lining up with plates in their hands, their faces full of excitement, as if they had been invited to a royal feast. Then came the first bites of the ghost pepper wings. Expressions were priceless. Wide eyes, dropped jaws, hands flapping in the air, and frantic runs toward the kitchen sink. He laughed so hard at one man who literally tried to shove his whole face under the faucet that he nearly spilled his coffee. And then came Karen. Oh, Karen? The camera had caught her proudly announcing to everyone that she had organized the buffet, boasting that she always knew he was generous. A few minutes later, the same camera captured her choking, sweating, hiccuping, and waving her arms like she was drowning. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was sticking out in all directions, and her voice cracked every time she tried to speak. Watching it all play out on screen was even funnier than seeing it live. He spent nearly an hour replaying the clips, pausing at the funniest reactions and saving the best moments. The teenager rolling on the floor pretending to die, the man fanning his tongue with a paper plate, the neighbor who thought he could handle the spice and ended up crying into a glass of milk. Every scene was comedy gold. He realized he wasn't just watching chaos, he was watching a story that people online would love. By the afternoon, he had edited the footage together into a short video. He added funny captions like, "When Karen says free food, but forgets to mention the ghost peppers and neighborhood buffet gone wrong." He even slowed down the funniest moments, like Karen's hiccuping fit and the dramatic collapse of the teenager. By the time he finished, the video was nearly 10 minutes long. It had him laughing so hard his sides hurt. He uploaded it to the internet with a simple title, "The Neighborhood Buffet That No One Expected." Then he closed his laptop and went about his day, not thinking much of it. But by the evening, his phone started buzzing with notifications. People were sharing the video, commenting on it, and tagging their friends. By midnight, the views had shot up to thousands, and the comments were flooding in. "This is legendary." One person wrote, "Karen got what she deserved," said. Another, "I laughed so hard I cried. Please tell me there's a part 2." The man could hardly believe it. The video was spreading faster than he ever imagined. He checked the numbers again the next morning and saw that it had already reached over 100,000 views. Strangers from all over were laughing at his neighborhood's chaos. And the comment section was filled with people demanding to know more about Karen. Meanwhile, in the neighborhood itself, the aftermath was just as interesting. People were talking about the buffet disaster on every corner. Some neighbors admitted they had been fooled by Karen's confidence and felt embarrassed for barging into his house. Others laughed about it, saying it was the funniest night they'd ever had. And then there were those who weren't so forgiving, blaming Karen for making them suffer through ghost pepper wings. Karen, of course, was furious. She didn't expect the video to go online, and she definitely didn't expect it to go viral. Everywhere she went, people made little jokes. Someone would cough loudly when she walked by. Someone else would fake hiccups. Even kids on the street started calling her Spicy Karen. Every time she stepped outside, she could hear laughter or whispers behind her back. One afternoon, Karen stormed over to the man's house, banging on his door until he opened it. Her face was still blotchy, though, this time from anger instead of peppers. "How dare you film us without telling us?" she snapped. "Take that video down right now." The man stood calmly in the doorway, sipping from a glass of water. "Karen," he said in a steady voice, "you walked into my house uninvited. You told everyone I was hosting a buffet. You even took credit for organizing it. The least I could do was capture the memory. It's humiliating," she shrieked. "You know how many people have seen it?" "Millions," he said with a small smile. "And they all agree on one thing. You were the star of the show." Karen's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. She turned red again, this time from rage, and stomped away, muttering under her breath. The video only grew more popular as days passed. News outlets started picking it up, calling it the spiciest neighborhood story of the year. Memes appeared online with Karen's sweaty face captioned with jokes like, "When you ask for free food, but get free fire instead." People all over the world were laughing. The man couldn't help but laugh along with them. Back in the neighborhood, something unexpected happened. The incident actually brought people closer together. Neighbors who barely spoke before now had something to laugh about every time they saw each other. They would wave, smile, and say things like, "Tried any ghost peppers lately?" A man noticed that people seemed friendlier to him, even apologizing for believing Karen so easily. Some even offered to bring him groceries as a thank you for the entertainment. Karen, on the other hand, found herself alone. People stopped trusting her words, knowing she had a habit of twisting the truth. Where she once strutted around proudly, now she walked quickly with her head down, trying to avoid eye contact. She didn't shout at kids playing outside anymore, and she didn't scold people about their lawns. It was as if the whole experience had humbled her, at least for a little while. One evening, as the man sat on his porch sipping tea, a couple of neighbors came by. They laughed about the whole situation and told him the video had reached over 5 million views. "You're a legend now," one of them said. "The guy who turned a Karen problem into a comedy show?" The man chuckled and shook his head. "I didn't plan for it to go this far. Just wanted to teach her a lesson." "Well," the neighbor replied, "you did more than that. You made the whole world laugh." The man leaned back in his chair, feeling satisfied. He hadn't just turned Karen's lie into a prank, he had turned it into something unforgettable. And as he thought about it, he realized there was a kind of justice in what had happened. Karen had wanted to make herself look important, but in the end, she had made herself the punchline of a joke that people would remember for years, and he didn't even have to raise his voice once. The neighborhood never looked the same after the so-called buffet night. For weeks, people kept talking about it as if it had been the biggest event of the year. Whenever neighbors bumped into each other on the street or at the grocery store, they would laugh and share their favorite part. Some would mimic the dramatic teenager rolling on the floor. Others would talk about the man who shoved his whole face under the faucet. But most people loved bringing up Karen's meltdown. Everyone had their own version of the story, but all versions ended the same way, with Karen choking and hiccuping, while the rest of the room laughed. The man who had cooked the food noticed the change right away. Suddenly, neighbors who barely spoke to him before were waving at him when he walked by. Some even dropped by with small gifts, bottles of milk, cartons of ice cream, or bags of chips, as if it was their way of thanking him for the entertainment. A couple of teenagers who lived down the street started calling him Chef whenever they saw him. And one woman admitted she replayed his video so many times. Her family could quote the funniest lines word for word. Even though most people were laughing about it, there was also a quiet understanding that Karen was the one who had started everything. The more they thought about it, the more they realized how easily they had believed her lies. Some neighbors felt embarrassed that they had just walked into his home without asking him directly, and a few even came to apologize personally. Told him, "We should have asked you first," instead of listening to her. It won't happen again. Karen, of course, was having the hardest time of all. Her reputation had been ruined, not just in the neighborhood, but online. People called her Buffet Karen, Spicy Karen, and even Ghost Pepper Queen. Whenever she tried to talk in public, people would smirk or giggle. Kids would make fake coughing sounds when she walked past, and adults would look away because they didn't want to burst out laughing in her face at first. She tried to fight back. She told anyone who would listen that the man had tricked her, that he had set her up, that he had made the wings on purpose to embarrass her. But the more she complained, the worse it got. People would nod politely, but laugh about it later. No one wanted to defend her because deep down, everyone knew the truth. She had twisted his words, spread lies, and barged into his house with half the neighborhood. She wasn't the victim. She had only herself to blame. Meanwhile, the video kept growing online. What started as a few thousand views turned into millions. News channels picked it up, YouTubers made reaction videos, and people on social media kept sharing it with captions like, "This is how you handle a nosy neighbor," and "Revenge serves spicy." Some even edited Karen's face into memes, adding ghost pepper flames behind her. The man couldn't go a day without someone sending him another funny edit of his video. He never thought of himself as famous. But in a strange way, he became a local legend. People who didn't even live in his neighborhood recognized him when he went shopping. They would smile and say things like, "Aren't you the ghost pepper guy?" or "Loved your buffet video." He would laugh and nod politely, still amazed that something so small had turned into such a big story. One evening, as he sat on his porch drinking tea, a group of neighbors gathered around. They started joking about hosting another buffet, this time a real one. When someone said, "You should. Do it for real, but make sure to warn us if there are ghost peppers involved." The group laughed, and another neighbor added, "Yeah, just make sure Karen isn't in charge of the invitations this time." The man thought about it for a moment and then smiled. "Maybe I'll do it," he said. "But only if Karen promises to stay at home." The neighbors burst out laughing again, and the joke spread quickly. For weeks, whenever someone brought up the idea of a party, someone else would say, "Only if Karen isn't invited." Karen hated it. She stopped going to neighborhood gatherings and avoided walking outside during busy hours. For someone who used to insert herself into everyone's business, her sudden silence was shocking. But deep down, she knew she had brought it all on herself. No matter how hard she tried, people weren't going to forget the image of her sitting on that couch, hiccuping and sweating with ghost pepper sauce smeared on her fingers. The man, on the other hand, felt more relaxed than ever. For years, he had quietly tolerated Karen's gossip and bossy behavior, but now she didn't dare to bother him. She didn't shout when he parked near her house. She didn't complain about his cooking smells, and she definitely didn't try to spread rumors about him anymore. It was as if the ghost pepper wings had burned away her courage. One afternoon, he went grocery shopping again, filling his cart with chicken, spices, and vegetables, like he always did. A neighbor spotted him and said, "Uh-oh, are you making another ghost pepper trap?" He laughed and shook his head. "No traps this time, just dinner for myself." But as he pushed the cart down the aisle, he couldn't help but chuckle. The truth was, part of him enjoyed the idea that people thought he might prank them again. It kept everyone on their toes. The funniest part was that people online kept demanding a sequel. Comment after comment appeared on his video saying things like, "We need part 2, and please invite Karen again." Some even sent him recipes for hotter sauces, daring him to make something spicier than ghost peppers. He didn't plan on doing it again, but the thought made him smile. When he looked back on the whole experience, he realized it had taught him something important. At first, he had been shocked and annoyed when half the neighborhood showed up at his door. He could have shouted, kicked everyone out, and caused an ugly fight. But instead, he stayed calm, thought it through, and found a way to turn the situation into something funny. In the end, he got the last laugh not just in his neighborhood, but across the world. As for Karen, her story became a warning. People joked about it, but they also learned not to believe everything she said. If she started gossiping again, someone would raise an eyebrow and ask, "Is this another buffet story?" It usually shut her up immediately. Slowly, she faded into the background, no longer the loud voice of the neighborhood, but just another face people ignored. On a quiet evening weeks later, the man sat in his backyard, grilling chicken and sipping a cold drink. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the houses, and he could hear neighbors laughing together down the street. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt peaceful. He smiled to himself and thought about how strange life could be. One silly misunderstanding had turned into a night of chaos, a viral video, and a permanent change in how people saw Karen. He flipped a piece of chicken on the grill and laughed softly. Maybe one day he really would host a proper buffet, just to see the looks on people's faces. But if he did, there would be one rule written in bold letters at the door: Karen not invited. And with that thought, he took a bite of his food and enjoyed the quiet evening, knowing he had created a story that no one in the neighborhood and maybe even the whole internet would ever forget.